Welcome back to Oceania Room for our afternoon session. My name is Finn Russell. I'm a member of the Govis committee, and outside of that, I'm a business analyst at the Commerce Commission. I very much appreciate the opportunity to present this session of the conference. As a relatively new public servant, pardon me. We have some great presentations coming up, so thank you for sticking around. We have two presentations left today, which will take us through to the end of the conference and the networking drinks, so that's very exciting. Our first presentation is a panel discussion, The Chiefs Talk Digital Resilience. Thank you to Don Christie and Panellists for sponsoring this discussion. We've lined up several chief officers from throughout the public sector to discuss their views on digital resilience, both personally and in terms of government organisations. They will be discussing the big risks that threaten our public sector organisations and how they see us strengthening our resilience to mitigate these risks. So, I'll just introduce everyone. Our first panellist is Bill Moses, Chief Digital Officer for the Public Service Commission. Yeah. Thanks, boys. Bill has 10 years of government experience and more in the private sector delivering large-scale digital government projects. Bill's work and his passion centre on linking people, organisations and projects together. Secondly, we have Suzanne Pullman, Chief Information Officer at the Commerce Commission, and funnily enough, my boss. Ooh, lovely. Suzanne has 13 years of IT experience in government, including 3 as CIO at the Commission, stepping up just weeks before the global COVID-19 pandemic emerged. The challenges that the pandemic exposed intensify the priority of digital resilience and set this domain as a key focus area in Suzanne's role. Our final panellist is Mark Horgan, the Chief Advisor to the CDO-CIO at the Ministry of Education. Mark has a background covering teaching, representing the government's trade with China, consulting internationally in knowledge management and working in various strategy-focused roles, including with the Government Chief Digital Officer. Finally, the chair for this panel is Richard Foy, a former Chief Archivist at Archives New Zealand. Richard is a tech-savvy futurist who is enthusiastically committed to leadership in and the prosperity of the public service. Over his career and within his personal life, Richard has embraced the cultural diversity throughout New Zealand and has been successful in leading effectively throughout his professional life. So, without further ado, I'll hand over to Richard to begin the Chief's discussion on digital resilience.
Okay, thank you everyone. Thank you for those kind words, Finn. Ngā mihi, nami nui kia koutou katoa. Ko Wangwapfi tokunga tuturu, ko Richard Foy aho. I'm Richard Foy. It's a real pleasure to be here this afternoon near the end of the day of Govis, which has been a fantastic day. I hope everyone's had a great time. I want to, in particular, at the end of this day, thank Catherine, who's right at the back, who's been doing a fantastic job of transcription, and she's now having to transcribe her own name in the record. And I had a talk with Catherine before because it's really quite fascinating to see how she's doing this, using a little transcription, stenography kind of little gadget and a whole bunch of skill. And we were talking about how some of the words that she's transcribed have come up with some quite interesting transcriptions. And I said to her, look, I'm going to call out some of these. They're on us, ladies and gentlemen, because if we don't speak slowly, and if we don't enunciate, then she can't transcribe them. It's not her fault, okay? So some of the really funny ones I wrote down before, I'll start with something pretty innocuous, and that was wazoo. So I think it was Stephen Clark that mentioned up the wazoo, and that came out as wasoo. So that's pretty okay. There was malware that became mallware. So what do you wear to the mall? Copying, that was copying. That was a funny one, wasn't it, Catherine? We had a good laugh about that. And then, of course, ticketing, which became dick etching. Now, that's perfect. Fantastic. All right, so that's just a bit of a laugh. And we've got, I think, hopefully a great panel this afternoon. 3 chiefs. Mark is a chief advisor. That's why he's allowed to sit here. So that's fantastic. I guess I just want to start by asking, have any of you learned anything today or heard or seen anything that's changed your sense or conception of what we mean by digital resilience? And I'm going to use that portmanteau of DigiRes. So anyone? Have you learned something? Thought something good?
Kia ora, Richard. Tēnā korua. Suzanne and Mark. Ko ruahine te monga, te uru nei takunako, ko tūtaikuri to awe mahia nei aku maharahara, no Heratonga aho, kei te whanganui atara o e noho ana, ko Wiramu tōku ingoa, he mihi mai oha ki ngā tangata o te ranei. Thank you everybody. I'm Bill, I'm the Chief Digital Officer at Te Kaumataho. What have I learned today? We'll go back to the first talk from NCSC. And I think a lot of us here think that our agencies are quite nice and secure. We hope they're all quite nice and secure. But I actually went to the NCSC website. I'm going to have a look at the framework and just going to go and double check. So that's the first thing I'm going to do when I get back to the office on Monday.
Excellent. Mark or Suzanne, anything that you want to call out?
Mark Horgan, tōku ingoa. Just from that same session, I was absolutely staggered that for one of the most sophisticated frameworks around malware, or malware, passwords at a very, very basic level will practically eliminate that risk. Not completely, of course, but...
I was going to probably suggest the first session as well, but I went to the public digital cloud, but the cloud project one, and there were 2 things I came out of that one. One is that we're getting a replacement for the Cloud 105 questions, which I cannot wait for personally. And I think the other side of it, both on that conversation and the other one around cloud, was that there is still such a big conversation around cloud and sovereignty, and there's no right answer yet. It's just a conversation we need to keep having.
Cool. So, Suzanne, when you turn up to work on Monday, because I would imagine you're going to go back to work on Monday, and Finn comes up to you. He won't do this, of course, because he likes his job. But imagine one of your team come up to you and they say, this Govis thing you went to the other day on Friday, what exactly is digital resilience? Because I mentioned to someone that I was coming to a conference and I said, yeah, and they asked, what is it about? I said, digital resilience. They rolled their eyes. I can't blame them, but what are you going to say to them? What are you going to say?
I can understand that. It might be another buzzword, but for me, resilience is really about what you do to strengthen and prepare, whether it's yourself, whether it's in your environment, and then how you're ready to bounce back if something does happen. And whether that's digital or any other area of resilience, that's, in a nutshell, what it means to me. So it's nothing crazy. It's just, preparing, being strong at the beginning and bouncing back if anything does happen.
I like what you said about in terms of some of it's about systems, processes, infrastructure. You also mentioned ourselves. We'll come back to that one a bit later. Mark or Bill, anything to add to that from your own definitions or readings?
Certainly the culture side of this is probably the most important, I think, in terms of we know that the risks that are exploited, I don't know currently what the number was quoted today, but I think it was around about 80% of the incidents had human interaction. So if we're not making sure that all of our staff and contractors and whoever else are working in the organisations take security seriously, then our digital resilience, no matter what we do in terms of cloud services and whatever else, we're screwed basically.
Yeah,
That got transcribed correctly too, Mark. Screwed, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to take this quite slowly just in case.
Yeah.
So I totally agree with Suzanne. So given the title of our talk, Chief's Talk, so digital resilience, agree with Suzanne. So there's a personal aspect to resilience, and I think the word pivot was used by Stats earlier in a talk, and being able to prepare yourself for changes that come. But in terms of our organisations, it's our responsibility to make sure that our organisations are prepared for digital changes that come. I mean, AI is jumping up on us at the moment, so we need to make sure the organisation is prepared. If I could put a system level perspective on that as well, given where I work, it's ensuring that all of us know that we can actually work together to make the public service resilient in the future. So we did quite a bit of this after lockdown to make sure that we shared a lot of our security protocols, settings, change management processes, making sure that we could all be prepared for the cloud, especially those of us who had already been through that journey, how we can support those of us that were new to the journey or partway through the journey and give them that kind of collateral so that it would accelerate their digital maturity. So we've got our own organisation, and if we as public servants think about the system as well, that would be good.
Okay, so that's maybe a good segue into a question I had around what the system actually is doing at your level as chiefs to have a conversation about resilience and actually building that resilience into the system at multiple levels. But you've sort of said kind of what's happened because of COVID. Is there something ongoing that's happening, and who's talking to who?
I'll start. There are probably some projects I'm aware of that obviously some aren't, given the Slido questions. Let's think about where we work. So we're in Wellington at the moment. I'm assuming most here are from Wellington. Hands up if you've journeyed to Wellington to come to Govis today. Welcome. There's a project going on at the moment for regional hubs around the motu. So if you think as a public servant, you should be able to work wherever you're needed, and you should be able to travel and just pop into a public service office, open up your laptop and connect. So that's a project we're working on at the moment. It'll start with a central building, probably Bowen House, which is the building being renovated opposite the Beehive, and that'll be a building that any public servant can come in and use. All right? We're working on the protocols and standards for that at the moment, but that's the premise or the vision for that building. So if we get that right, then maybe we can have centralised credentials for public servants as well. Maybe we can have ubiquitous Wi-Fi around all buildings in the public service. So you should be able to just go where you want, access whatever you want. Might even be a government, a public servant directory, God forbid.
Mark and Suzanne, what do you guys think of that?
With the Ministry of Education, we have dual responsibilities. One is for the organisation and the other government agencies. But the one that we've been focusing on considerably, and some of you might have seen a presentation by a couple of colleagues here around Equal Digital Operating Service. And the real resilience that we need across the nation is for every whānau in the country to have internet connectivity, ubiquitous internet connectivity if we're going to do things digitally. We found that we needed to respond during COVID especially. We've been doing it beforehand on a smaller scale, but COVID gave us the reason to say to government, this is an issue and it needs to be funded, which they've done now for 3 years. We recently got some funding to extend it through to an odd time in schools, middle of the calendar year. But this is something that needs to be an all of government service in terms of not just digital resiliency, but resiliency for every whānau to be able to operate in New Zealand.
So you're thinking about resilience of communities
Absolutely.
as well, so
Absolutely.
not just infrastructure there.
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Suzanne, Commerce Commission.
Yeah, so I'll stick a bit to, I guess, a smaller system. The Commerce Commission doesn't have a lot of public-facing digital interactions. So we do have a website and we do have certain things with industries we regulate, but that really means a lot of my job and my team's job is the resiliency of the Commission themselves. So our staff members and our systems, it's a little bit more insular looking. So a lot of what we're doing is around that and the training of our staff and treating the wider resiliency. So as a simple example and a bit on a practical level, we posted something recently to all of our staff around Do they know how visible their information is online? Do they know what's actually being shared on LinkedIn or other sites, and how can they protect their own personal information and that side of it? I do know that some of our branches, though, are looking at resiliency, and if we think about one of our regulated industries is fibre. There's a lot of talks happening within the branches around what happened with Cyclone Gabrielle, and is there more that they can do to ensure the strength of those networks and the strength of what's happening. Not quite what we get to look at. Ours is a little bit more about what we do to support the Commission themselves to then do their job, but that's been thought about.
So when I get you guys to be a little bit vulnerable, and obviously do this in a safe way because you don't want to expose all your threats and vulnerabilities and weaknesses, but can you identify one or two things that you feel are the most vulnerable things that you need to work on in terms of resilience within your organisations today? And actually, are you guys having conversations not just with yourselves and your teams, but also with the executives? Who wants to start?
I can grab this one.
Yeah.
So, touched on it a little bit before, but it is, and it always will be, your people. No matter what you think you have trained people in and educated them in, you will always get caught out. And this morning, the NCSE talk, he mentioned that they provide incident management response, and I actually tried to catch him to thank him because we had an incident ourselves. It didn't go any further. It was stopped because of the protection we had in place, but a staff member still fell for a phishing attempt. We thought we'd trained them well, and they didn't quite catch it. So learning who to target within the Commission and who to really focus training on, because they might be our front line for emails, or your executive assistants get all the emails on behalf of people that will be attempted to be scams or phishing. So that's an area that we just continually try and educate and do further in. On our system side of things, I think resilience for us, we still have an on-premise server room at the Commission. So actually on-premise, it's on the same floor I work on, which is crazy. And on it is our document management system. So that is a big area for me. I think it's still, we need to do something about it, and what does it look like to move that? But that is a scary thing, because you go, okay, do we stick with the system? Are we changing what we look at? There's the behemoth of Microsoft. Do we just go to SharePoint online? But that's the next big thing for us.
Old school, Suzanne, on-premise. Could also make you feel good. You can go and touch it and go, all our data's there.
It is quite nice doing a show and tell every once in a while and going, this is what a server room actually looks like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as we had in the conversation this morning, maybe that's just the right scale you need. So interesting. Okay. Mark or Bill, can you say, Mark?
From within the organisation, I'd certainly say exactly the same. It's around staff education, and I can't remember who the quote is from, but the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. Certainly is something to keep going here. But we also have a responsibility for 8,000 early learning and centres in Kohanga-Reo, 2,500 schools in Kura, and around 8,000, although that came down a little bit with Te Pukenga, tertiary institutions. And we say in the compulsory education sector, which is the schooling in Kura, that we have 2,500 CIOs. They all make independent decisions about the services and things that they run for their organisation. But some of them are extremely small, principal and one teacher, or maybe just a principal even, who is the teacher, through to 2,000 staff, depending on the institution. We need to support their capability. We do that partly in the compulsory sector through a Crown company called Network for Learning, and in the tertiary sector through the Research and Education Advanced Network New Zealand. They have some gross security mechanisms to help, but it always comes down to people in those organisations who will be targeted. Schools have their data frozen on a regular basis through malware, and are not necessarily able to recreate that. So as small businesses, they get crippled. So will always come down to people. We can put in a number of systems and processes to mitigate those risks or lower the risk, but it'll come down to people.
Bill, Public Service Commission, what do you guys do that? Oh, sorry, I'm not asking what you guys do, but what are the things you guys worry about? Because you are actually quite different than both Education and the Commerce Commission.
We get involved in everything, Richard. It's mostly a policy arm, but I think what do I worry about? What Mr. Hughes worries about. But from an organisational point of view, it's fear of the unknown. When our Deputy Chief Melitza and I go to the Governance Board, we've just got to, we don't know what they're scared of, so we've got to tackle that. Melitza will be running an awareness program over the year so that we encourage people to share their digital experiences and remove the phobia around digital and data so that they are open to the conversation and new things that are coming up. That'd help us out a lot.
Great. Do any of you guys have any questions for each other while we're here? I'll just take a moment from what you've been hearing. Or do you think that some of your colleagues should be thinking about some other problems that they haven't mentioned?
Well, I mean, project that is really dear to my heart is federating across the public service.
Yeah.
So when I think about the public service, obviously given my role, that's what we generally do. We're thinking about the public service. Peter doesn't necessarily care too much about the Public Service Commission, but he cares a hell of a lot about the public service, and he cares about every one of you. So when I think about that, we're thinking about how we can federate with each other, how we can join up with each other, what are the easy low-hanging fruit that we can all just go out and pick and implement. And you're all technology or data in the room. You should all be talking to each other and sharing your skills and experiences and seeing what you can do individually to make things better. Like, don't wait for your system leads to run a project. Don't wait for GCDO. Bless them. Don't wait for GCDS. Don't wait for cybersecurity. If you see something needs happening, go and talk to your peers and your community groups and do something about it. Get them all together, share your experiences, and just make it happen.
See, that's leadership, ladies and gentlemen, because I was going to say, isn't that the role of the GCDO and GCDS? But actually...
They are there to support you.
Yeah,
they will 100% back you. But I'm saying there's just a lot to do, and they have a limited number of resources to do that work in. So they're relying on all of us to get together to do this stuff.
Great. I want to ask you guys how you keep abreast of all the problems of the world when it comes to this notion of resilience. And we've talked a little bit about systems and processes and people. Actually, I might mention what came to my mind, I think, Suzanne, when you were talking about people, if I think about Radio New Zealand, they have a system that involves a lot of people as well as technology, and they had a breakdown in that system which eroded their reputation recently. Now, that wasn't an external threat, it was an internal threat. Is that something that you guys think about much or have to deal with? And how you're thinking about these things? Is it just when some execs come up with we're scared about this because we saw it on Radio New Zealand News? Or are you guys systematically caring about this? Any thoughts?
Systematically caring about this, absolutely. Insider threat is in government as much as it is in private enterprise or anything else. And we take a liberal view of that. So it's not the look at everything to check that everything is happening, but certainly periodically logs are looked at. I remember some time ago, and happens regularly, just to see what search terms are being used and what material is coming through our filtering systems, etc. And if something's found, then we'll certainly look into it. But it's not something that we take a big brother view, but certainly that insider threat is always there.
Yeah, so if I'd maybe talk to more of the keeping abreast to what's happening in that space, a big thing for us is connecting into the NCSC alerts, which were mentioned again, but just general tech news. You're going to find out about anything being exploited pretty quickly in that space as well. We've done a lot of work internally around vulnerability management and putting something in place that's scanning our networks, that's checking regularly. But that's one side of it, because it can do all the scanning, but if you don't have a team that's on top of it that wants to do something about it and actively makes the changes, it's not going to do anything either. So culture change in my own team as well. We've shifted a lot to not having the security people being the ones making the actions and the decisions on what to do, but it's a conversation between our security and our engineers is, hey, we're seeing these vulnerabilities, what's the most important thing, what's the next step, and how do we work through it? So big culture changes there. But something Bill said earlier reminded me as well, when we talk about the big scary things or what our execs are doing, a little story that happened with us. Myself and my general manager one day got an email going, hey, we've got a huge risk that's just come up on our register from our board, and there's this huge risk around ChatGPT. And the risk was that we're now going to get bombarded with fake submissions because of ChatGPT. And it was this funny moment of, they had no clue that could have happened for any time. You just copy-paste, you do it any other way, but they'd heard ChatGPT in the news and wanted a big risk front and centre on the register about it. So it was a good opportunity to educate and go, yep, that is a risk, but not that big and not new. It's been there for a long time, and just talk through how it actually doesn't matter too much. That's not the biggest thing for us. So that's the other side of it as well, is just keeping in with some of the crazy conversations and sanity coming into it.
Great. You got anything to add to that, Bill? No? Or any little stories there? That was a great little story. Love it.
I can't shut up. But just to carry on the point about your communities of practice, working in with them and making sure that you are sharing and you're learning back as well. I think there was an analogy I heard today, which was you join a Facebook group and you're really engaged with the Facebook group, and you might be putting up posts and everybody else comments on it, and as you mature in that Facebook group, then you stop putting out those posts and you start commenting on those posts, and eventually you're just reading those posts and thinking, oh my God, the same question is coming through. But we're at multiple phases of our career, aren't we, panellists? So we're going from the younger to the older as we go through, so we need to be there to support each other. But if I think stories, when Suzanne and I worked together, we brought in some, in terms of learning, we brought in some high school students to come in and do, I think it was work experience. There was a couple of them that came in, and they were really excited. They were quite energised to come in and see what real adults did. So we sat them down at a desk and put them in front of a computer in a screen, and we introduced them to some other people, and they got to experience the day. End of the day, how did it go? They said, "Do you sit at your desk all day?" Well, yeah. Well, what things do you think we should change? Well, we just look at our phone, and the phone signs us in. So we're thinking, okay, well, hello service would be quite good. But learning from the next generation is something that you want to do on a regular basis. Our intern at the moment has introduced us to a new term, which is all G. Yeah. All G.
All G.
Yeah, you'll have to learn that from an intern.
Okay. Is it like all good?
Yeah.
Not all GPT 4.0. Okay, talking about a younger generation, my daughter's trying to ring me right now, and I've been hitting cancel 3 times. She's very resilient. All right, I've just got one question to ask before we go to the Slido boards. We've talked about resilience, about building in capability, capacity, dealing with crisis events. What about the people, the human element that sits behind our ability to run these systems, to look after infrastructure, and how to, I guess, build in the resilience of our people? And I'm not talking about technical capability here. I'm talking about the ability to turn up to work, make sense of what's going on, follow, lead, and get on with things. This is something I care about a lot, having gone through my own sort of lack of resilience recently. What are you doing for your people? Because it's not getting any easier, right? Adapting to change is getting harder, and these crisis events are getting more complex. Any thoughts, folks?
We certainly found, and I'm sure this is the case for almost every organisation following lockdowns, was that there was a huge variety in how our staff and our management reacted to the idea of coming back into the office. some from health reasons. We're averse to being in there and close, and so, as you know, we all had distancing between desks, and et cetera. That's continued for some people who still remain anxious about that. There were others who, having been away from physical interaction with people, wanted to be in the office all the time. And we're still running, I don't know, we're about 20%, 25% occupancy, I would say. It's really quite low. What I have noticed in some staff, and have had to reach out quite strongly to get them, meet them, and then bring them back into the office, because their resiliency was lower by not having that level of connection. So somehow connection, certainly with Teams and Zoom and all those things, you can have a quite a significant level of connection, but there are some of those things where the physical proximity is something. So your question's very deep, and there are many aspects to how do we think about resiliency in a human space.
Great, thank you, Mark. Suzanne?
Yeah, I think a big thing is the culture you create and the culture you foster within your teams as well. So work-life balance is incredibly important to me, as I don't think you can be resilient at work if you're already expected to deliver 100% every day, and then when some crisis comes in, you don't have any extra capacity to do anything else as well. If you're already at 100%, where does that next thing fit in? So I really want to foster and build a culture, and I think we're quite successful in this, looking at Finn, of our team being people first and caring about each other first, and knowing that life is a lot more than just the hours you're at work. And that's a huge thing. We've had some hard experiences at work, and for a smallish commission, we've had 5 people pass away in the commission in the last 4 years, and you come away from that as a team remembering how important life is, and building together and stronger in that team as well. So I think that's part of it, and that's the biggest part of it for me, is that culture we build and supporting each other. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, great. Nice. Bill, anything to add from your side? Or?
Just to go after Suzanne's note, we run a service arm. IT is a service arm, and I like the people-facing element of a service arm. So if I'm showing my vulnerable side, I really struggle with work from home. So in terms of individuals asking if they can work from home, we stopped that from happening, and we stopped it from being my decision, and we made it a team decision. So that was an aspect of me trying to pivot and change and dealing with my insecurities around working from home, and making it a team agreement that we had working from home. And in that aspect, I think we are sitting at like 60% occupancy on day-to-day, apart from Tuesdays when we're all in the office. But we're trying to do that in terms of leading the organisation and making an example.
Okay, well, thank you. Thanks for talking to that. I think we'll go to the boards, a Slido. There's one question I can answer, which is, Richard Foy, what is your rank in Starfleet? I'm a captain. So that's that one done. Here's one for you, Bill. It's just, can we have a public sector office in Auckland too? I'm not too sure that's your decision, but, you know.
There's 2 of them up there. So the ends up if you're from MB. Okay. Right, whether or not you know this, you're in charge of the Auckland Policy Office. Woohoo! So the Auckland Policy Office, actually, it was set up for policy people to travel to Auckland and just use the office. So you've technically got one up there already, but that's being renovated and reinvigorated. And there's also a building being stood up in Manukau, referred to as the Manukau Hub. So there's the dirt hasn't started being dug on that one, but the planning is starting for that.
Great. Look, I'll just go some of these from the top. This question here, is there any reason you or we invest in proprietary software over open source? This feels like a resilience issue. Is it?
But might be some examples required. I mean, if you're referring to Microsoft technologies, they're mostly based around open frameworks. I imagine there's 2 or 3 architects and around here that could answer that question better than I could. But AAD, for example, I know is based on an open framework. So we can integrate those types of things with open frameworks if we need to.
Yeah, we have a whole plethora of services run on open source software. We do run quite a bit of proprietary software as well. That's quite true. Depends on the need and the answer to the RFP that we put out for the various things.
It's an interesting one. I think as a smaller agency, we will stick to some of the tried and true and known-ones as there's a lower cost of entry because you know others are using it and it will pass the security side of it as well. So there's a little bit less risk associated with choosing something that's more of the proprietary that others have used. But it's a funny one that I've been thinking about because obviously the Commerce Commission part of our role is around monopolies and fair competition in the market. Yet you'll choose Microsoft for Word and Outlook because it's the right choice. So it's funny, and we've been thinking about it a bit as well, and how we're making sure we're sticking to our own rules for competition.
Not simple answers, are they? And they have wide-ranging implications because of the collaborative nature of the public service, which is a good way to connect to this next question, which is further the bill saying agencies need to work together. How do we actually do this with so many barriers with sharing, for example, dollars, access, and how do we not reinvent the wheel? Have you guys got any thoughts on that?
Why'd you pass it to me?
Yeah. Well, it's not just on Bill.
Richard's right. It's not just on me. It's an answer that we all have to create. So I'm going to point to Melitza again. Melitza and I ran some workshops with public servants to say, if there were no boundaries, physical or digital, to you all collaborating, working together, what would you do? So we weren't asking for a technology response from them. We were asking from what would be enabled if we did X, Y, and Z. And we got some really good answers back. I think the most practical responses we got were from people leads, HR leads across the public service, and the digital leads across the public service. We had some good feedback from them. We asked the New Professionals Network to come in and talk as well, and they were the ones that there's only two things they really wanted. One was access to people's calendars and a public service directory. So sometimes there are really, really simple things that we can do. And one of the things that I'm trying to do at the moment, and admittedly it's a hub and spoke model, but federated teams access across the public service. So education or open federated, thank you very much. But for the rest of you, I think I'm up to 30 agencies at the moment, which allow for just free chatting over Teams, so long as your agency federates with the Public Service Commission. But eventually we'll all be open federated and we can all just freely chat with each other. So those are little simple things that we can do.
Right. Look, I think we're getting to the end of our time. There's only one, I'm just going to ask one question. It's probably more one of the philosophical ones. Just see what you think. This is, will humans always be the weakest link for digital resiliency? You can just sort of go yes, no, maybe. I mean, What do you think? Are we actually the weakest link?
I'm going to choose a cheesy answer. I think we are the weakest, but also the strongest link in it. And I know it's a cheesy answer, but it really is.
Okay. Yeah. All right. I know we need to move on because there are people following us. So big hand to Suzanne, Mark and Bill for being on this panel. Thank you.